The countdown on the conference room screen had already dropped below 72 hours when my father finally looked at my daughter and begged. "Please, Talia," he said. 800 people will lose their jobs if you don't prove those records were forged. 20 years earlier, that same man had stood on his front porch while I was 17, pregnant and holding one suitcase. "That baby will never carry our name," he had told me. My mother had folded her arms beside him. "You've embarrassed us enough." Now they were seated beneath the silver Halden Industrial Components logo, waiting for the baby they had called their shame to save the company they had chosen over us. Talia did not answer them. She connected her laptop to the wall display and opened a ledger filled with payments to companies that did not exist. The bank had frozen Halden's credit line. Payroll was due Friday morning. If the insurer classified the missing millions as internal fraud instead of a cyberattack, the factory could shut down before the weekend. My brother Nolan leaned forward. "We already know who did this. Elias Ward stole the files when we fired him." Talia clicked once. The employee code beside the oldest transaction read, "MLang 17. The room went silent. I recognized it before anyone said my name. It had been my login when I worked in the company's accounting office after school. "That account was disabled before I left," I whispered. Talia turned toward me. She was not looking at me as my daughter now. She was looking at me as an investigator. "Mom, this code approved the first payment to a ghost company 20 years ago." My father's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. My mother stopped breathing. Then Talia opened the timestamp. The transaction had been authorized at 6:14 on the morning she was born. At that exact moment, I had been in a hospital bed, holding the child my parents said had ruined their name. For the first time in 20 years, I understood that my pregnancy had never been the reason they threw me away. It had been their alibi. Stay with me to see what Talia uncovered inside the company's records, and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the truth my family buried for 20 years. Priya Desai, the attorney appointed by the board's special committee, closed the conference room door and faced us. She had a legal pad in front of her, but she did not look down when she spoke. "The bank suspended Halden's revolving credit line at 9:14 this morning," she said. "The company does not have enough unrestricted cash to fund Friday's payroll. The cyber insurer will only authorize emergency recovery coverage if we establish that this was an external or unauthorized intrusion. If the evidence points to fraud by current management, coverage may be denied." A timer in the corner of the wall display continued counting down. 71 hours and 46 minutes remained. I looked across the table at my parents. Victor Halden had lost most of the dark hair I remembered, and age had softened the skin around his jaw, but nothing about the way he occupied the room had changed. Even while asking for help, he sat as if everyone else were waiting for permission to breathe. Claudia looked almost untouched by time until I noticed the tremor in the fingers folded over her pearl bracelet. She gave me the careful smile she once used before saying something cruel enough to sound reasonable. "Marissa, sweetheart, I know this is difficult." I kept my eyes on the screen. I would not answer to sweetheart after 20 years of silence. Nolan slid a printed email toward Priya. He wore a charcoal suit and the calm expression of a man explaining a problem he believed he had already solved. "Elias Ward sent this 3 weeks before the attack," he said. "He wrote that he would burn the ghost vendors out of our system. He copied proprietary files when he was terminated, and now he has disappeared." Priya read the page, without changing expression. Nolan turned to Talia. "Your job is to verify the breach. We cannot let old family grievances distract from technical evidence." Talia removed her hands from the keyboard. "Before I continue, I need the record to reflect that Marissa Lang is my mother, Victor and Claudia Halden are my maternal grandparents, and Nolan Halden is my uncle." Nolan's mouth tightened. "I disclosed the relationship to Meridian as soon as I recognized the company name," she continued. "I will not sign the final attribution report. Every finding I make must be reproduced and approved by an independent reviewer. Priya nodded. That arrangement is already in place. For one brief second, pride cut through the pressure in my chest. My parents had hidden conflicts until the truth became useless. My daughter had placed hers on the table before anyone could ask. Victor leaned toward her. Whatever happened before, these people need you now. Talia did not react to the word before. I need complete access to the accounting archive, identity management logs, vendor onboarding records, bank reconciliation files, and backups from before the incident. No deletions, no system rebuild, and no administrator changes without written approval. You will have everything, Victor said, too quickly. Talia opened another screen. Rows of vendor names filled the display. Some sounded respectable enough to disappear inside any corporate ledger. Crestline Logistics, North County Freight, Allied Procurement Services. I had not heard those names spoken in 2 decades, yet my body remembered them before my mind did. Crestline had once appeared on a list I was supposed to enter after school. No loading dock, no delivery tickets, just invoices that stayed below the amount requiring a second signature. My palm flattened against the table. Talia enlarged the vendor template. Mlang, 17 is not attached to one payment. It is listed as the originating employee for the Crestline vendor profile. Every later ghost vendor copied fields from this original template. The data was not merely accusing me of approving a transaction. It was making me the starting point of the entire scheme. Nolan glanced at our parents. That supports what the old internal report said. I turned toward him. What report? He looked almost sorry for me. The report filed after you left. Claudia reached across the table, stopping before her hand touched mine. This is not the time to reopen every painful detail. It was the first moment I understood how much of my own history had been discussed in rooms where I was not present. Talia closed the vendor screen and looked at me. Did you keep anything from when you worked here? Pay stubs, access notices, printed vendor lists, anything with dates? The answer rose in my throat, with the image of cracked brown vinyl and a zipper that had jammed years ago. The suitcase was still beneath my bed. I had carried it through 3 apartments, 2 evictions, night classes, and every move Talia and I had made. I had never thrown it away, but I had not opened it in years. No, I said. Talia studied my face for 1 second longer than a daughter would have. Then she turned back to the records. Priya requested the archived employee file. Nolan objected that older material might be incomplete, but Talia was already comparing timestamps. She moved through the entries slowly, refusing to let the urgency force her into a conclusion. Victor rose and walked toward the window. Below us, the factory floor stretched beneath white lights. Hundreds of people were still working, unaware that the money for their next paycheck might never arrive. We do not have time for this, he said. We have exactly enough time to do it correctly, Talia replied. A new file opened on the screen. It was an archived vendor amendment carrying my employee code. The creation date appeared in the upper right corner. It had been created 3 days after Victor announced that I had stolen from the company and fled town. Talia looked first at the date, then at me. Her voice softened, but the question inside it did not. Mom, your account didn't disappear when they threw you out. Someone kept using your name. Talia's words followed me back 20 years, to the first time I saw Crestline Logistics on a computer screen. I was 17, still finishing high school, and working 3 afternoons a week in the accounts payable office at Halden Industrial Components. My father called it an opportunity to learn discipline. I treated it like an audition. Nolan had already been brought into management meetings, while I was still introduced as Victor Halden's youngest daughter. I wanted my father to look at a report I prepared and see someone useful, not a girl passing time until college. Most of my work was simple. I entered vendor information, matched invoices to purchase orders, and filed payment records before the accounting staff left for the evening. I liked the order of it. Every number belonged somewhere, And when it did not, there was usually a reason. Crestline Logistics had no reason. Its address led to a post office box across town. The file contained no delivery receipts, driver logs, or warehouse signatures. Yet invoice after invoice had been approved for amounts just below the level that required a second executive signature. The figures were different, but the pattern was too clean to be accidental. I checked the paper files twice, then searched the receiving database. Nothing had been delivered under Crestline's name. I printed the vendor list, circled the missing records, and folded the pages into my school notebook. The toner was still warm against my fingers. I planned to show my father the next morning. That evening, 2 pink lines appeared on a test in the bathroom of my friend's house. The baby's father was a boy my age named Aaron. He worked evenings at an auto parts store and had no family name that meant anything to Victor Halden. When I told him, he went pale, then took both my hands and said he would stay. He did not promise a perfect life. He promised he would work, finish school, and stand beside me when I told my parents. For one frightened hour, that was enough. My mother noticed before I found the courage to speak. She saw me push away dinner, followed me into the kitchen, and asked the question in a voice so quiet it felt more dangerous than shouting. Victor summoned Nolan home before he confronted me. My brother was 22, already wearing tailored suits, and sitting beside our father at company dinners. He stood near the fireplace while my parents faced me across the living room. No one offered me a chair. "Who is he?" my father asked. I told him Aaron's name. Victor's expression hardened. "The boy from the parts store. He wants to help," I said. "We can make a plan." My mother closed her eyes, as if I had said something obscene. Nolan looked at the floor. My father asked whether I intended to end the pregnancy. When I said no, he moved closer until I could smell the coffee on his breath. "That baby will never carry our name." My hand went to my stomach before there was anything to feel. "I'm still your daughter." Claudia folded her arms. "You've embarrassed us enough." I looked toward Nolan. He had spent years telling me that family protected its own. He did not meet my eyes. Victor placed 2 documents on the coffee table. One was a resignation letter. The other stated that I was leaving the company voluntarily and had returned all company property. He told me that if I signed, he would allow me to take clothes and personal belongings. If I refused, I would leave immediately with nothing, and he would make certain Aaron never found work in Riverton. I was 17, pregnant, and still believed a signature was only what the words above it said. I read the first page through tears. I did not understand why the second mentioned internal procedures and access records. When I asked, Victor said it was standard language. "Sign it, Marissa," Nolan said quietly. They were the first words he had spoken. I signed. My father took my employee badge from my purse and cut it in half with the scissors from his desk. The plastic snapped sharply. He placed both pieces beside the papers as though he had completed a business transaction. An hour later, I stood in my bedroom with a brown vinyl suitcase open on the bed. It had belonged to my grandmother and had a tear in the lining near one corner. I packed jeans, sweaters, school books, and the small envelope containing the cash I had saved from work. At the bottom of my desk drawer, I found the vendor list. Crestline Logistics stared back at me through the red circles I had drawn. I almost left it behind. Then I folded it into quarters and slid it beneath my clothes. I added my last pay stub, the 2 halves of my employee badge, and a printed notice from the technology department confirming that my account had been disabled. The papers smelled of warm ink and the dusty cabinet where I had kept them. I pushed them into the torn section of the lining when the suitcase would not close. No one helped me carry it downstairs. Rain struck the front windows hard enough to blur the streetlights. Claudia stood in the entryway, holding herself rigid, while Victor opened the door. Nolan remained behind them. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. "That is no longer our responsibility," my father said. "I'm still in school. You made an adult decision." My mother looked at the suitcase instead of my face. Do not come back until you understand what you have done to this family. I stepped onto the porch. The cold rain hit my hair and soaked the shoulders of my coat within seconds. I turned once, certain that someone would stop me. Nolan's face was visible between our parents, but he did not move. The door closed. I had no car. Aaron was working and did not own a phone. I had less than $80 in the envelope and no idea where I would sleep. I dragged the suitcase down the wet sidewalk toward the bus stop, one wheel catching on every crack. A friend from school let me spend the night on her bedroom floor. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the scissors cutting through my badge, and my father saying the baby would never carry our name. The next morning, my friend's older sister came home from an early shift at Halden. She was holding a folded company memo. "I thought you should see this," she said. The notice stated that an internal review had discovered unauthorized vendor activity linked to my employee account. It said I had admitted violating company procedures, resigned voluntarily, and left Riverton before management could complete its investigation. My name appeared beneath the words, Crestline Logistics. I read the memo twice, then unfolded the vendor list from my suitcase. The pages in my hands were the same pages I had planned to show my father. Only now, according to the company, they were evidence that I had created the fraud. By sunrise, I was no longer Victor Halden's pregnant daughter. According to the company memo, I was the thief who had run away. The lie in that company memo followed me long after I left Riverton. I gave birth to Talia in a county hospital, with borrowed clothes folded beneath my bed and $43 left in my purse. Aaron sat beside me through most of the labor, holding a damp cloth against my forehead and promising we would find a way forward. When the nurse placed our daughter in my arms, I did not see shame, failure, or the end of my future. I saw a small red face, dark hair pressed flat against her head, and fingers that closed around mine with surprising strength. I named her Talia Lang. Lang had been my grandmother's maiden name, a name no one in my father's company could take away or stain with another memo. Aaron tried to remain part of our lives. He worked longer shifts at the auto parts store and gave me most of what he earned. For several months, he slept on a couch in his cousin's apartment and came to see us whenever he could. Then, Victor contacted the store owner. Aaron was dismissed without explanation. 2 other employers withdrew offers after speaking to someone from Halden Industrial Components. My father never threatened him where I could hear it, but Aaron understood the message. If he remained in Riverton, Victor would make certain he could not support us. Aaron moved 2 counties away for work. He sent money when he could and called from payphones on Sunday evenings. As Talia grew older, the calls became less regular, not because he stopped caring, but because poverty made every mile and every missed shift expensive. When she was 4, he died in a highway accident while returning from a construction job. There was no hidden fortune, no secret second family, and no final revelation waiting in a safe deposit box. He had been a frightened young man who tried harder than anyone expected and died before our daughter could remember his voice. After the hospital, Talia and I lived in a rented room above a laundromat. The walls shook whenever the industrial dryers entered their final cycle. I learned to sleep through the vibration and to warm bottles in a mug of water because the room had no kitchen. I worked wherever someone trusted me with numbers. I prepared time cards for a cleaning company, entered invoices for a dentist, and balanced the books of a small grocery store whose owner paid me in cash and discounted food. During the day, I carried Talia between babysitters and jobs. At night, I took community college classes in payroll administration, tax preparation, and bookkeeping. Numbers still belonged somewhere. My father's lie had not changed that. Years passed in rented rooms and secondhand furniture. I earned certifications 1 course at a time, then began preparing tax returns from a folding table in our apartment. When 3 clients became 10, I rented a narrow office above a pharmacy. By the time Talia entered high school, Lang bookkeeping and payroll occupied 2 rooms and employed another single mother part-time. I did not become wealthy. I became dependable. My clients knew their employees would be paid on Friday, their quarterly taxes would be filed, and their records would not disappear when problems arrived. Talia knew her grandparents had rejected us. I never lied about that part. She knew Victor had ordered me out after learning I was pregnant, and that Claudia had agreed. What she did not know was that the company had accused me of theft. When she was 12, she found the Halden Industrial Components website and stared at the photograph of Victor, Claudia, and Nolan standing at a factory anniversary celebration. "Why didn't you tell people what they did?" she asked. "Why didn't you sue them?" I was sorting receipts at the kitchen table. I kept my eyes on the page, because I could not bear to watch her study the family who had denied her. "Some doors are safer closed," I told her. She never liked that answer. Even as a child, Talia noticed things other people accepted. At 9, she found that our electric bill contained a late fee from a month when the payment had cleared early. At 14, she showed a teacher that the school attendance system had marked her absent on a holiday. When she began helping in my office, she caught an invoice number that appeared twice under different vendor names. She did not merely look for mistakes. She wanted to know how the mistake had entered the system, who benefited from it, and why no one had noticed sooner. Computers gave her more places to ask those questions. She learned programming through free courses, joined a cybersecurity club, and completed college classes while still in high school. A scholarship paid for an accelerated program in digital forensics and information security. Meridian Cyber Assurance hired her as a junior incident analyst before she completed her final year, because she could explain complicated findings without pretending uncertainty did not exist. I kept every article that mentioned her work. I also feared the precision that made her exceptional. Every time she described recovering deleted records or reconstructing a false timeline, I thought about the brown suitcase beneath my bed. I had carried it from the room above the laundromat to our first apartment, then to the duplex where Talia learned to ride a bicycle, and finally to the home where she received her scholarship letter. I never opened it. Sometimes, while moving, I considered throwing it away. Each time, I told myself the papers inside no longer mattered. Then I would lift the suitcase into another closet or slide it beneath another bed, preserving the evidence while refusing to look at it. The night after the meeting at Halden, Talia arrived at my apartment, carrying her laptop bag and a folder. She did not remove her coat. "You said you kept nothing from the company," she said. "I didn't keep official records. That wasn't what I asked." I walked toward the kitchen and filled the kettle, although neither of us wanted tea. "It was 20 years ago, Talia. I left with clothes and school books." You looked away before you answered. The kettle clicked against the burner as my hand tightened around its handle. My daughter had inherited none of Victor's cruelty, but she had inherited his refusal to accept an answer that did not fit the evidence. She placed her bag on the table. "Priya formally removed me from final attribution authority. Another examiner has to reproduce every finding before it goes into the report. That should be the end of your involvement." "It isn't. I found the account pattern, and I understand how the old records connect to the current attack. I still have to complete the analysis." "They will use you." "I know." Her answer came without hesitation, which frightened me more than denial would have. The television in the living room was still on. A local reporter stood outside the factory gates while workers gathered behind temporary barriers. Some held phones, others stood with their arms folded against the evening cold. The reporter explained that Halden's credit line remained frozen and that employees had received no guarantee Friday's payroll would be funded. Then she interviewed a woman wearing a blue factory jacket with the name Rosa embroidered above the pocket. "My rent is due next week," Rosa Delgado said. "My son's medication comes through this insurance. I don't care which executive blames which hacker. I need to know what I'm supposed to tell my child if this place closes." Talia lowered the television volume. 800 jobs had sounded like a number inside the conference room. Rosa made it a kitchen table, a prescription bottle, and a child waiting for an answer. I walked down the hall to my bedroom. The suitcase remained beneath the bed, its brown surface hidden behind a row of shoe boxes. I pulled the boxes aside and rested my fingers on the cracked handle. The vinyl felt colder than I expected. Behind me, Talia entered the doorway but did not approach. I could have pulled the suitcase out. Instead, I pushed it farther into the shadow and stood. "I told you, I don't have anything useful." "You have something," she said. "I don't know whether it's useful because you won't let me see it." She returned to the kitchen and removed a single printed page from the folder. It showed a Crestline Logistics payment stamped with my employee code and a date from the week I had been expelled from the house. She placed it in front of me without accusation. My silence had once protected Talia from people who considered her existence a disgrace. Now it was sending her into their records without the one history that might help her understand what she was seeing. "Mom," she said, "let's not asking whether they hurt you. I'm asking whether there is anything in that suitcase that can prove how." By 8 the next morning, Talia had already been inside Halden Industrial Components for 3 hours. I found her in a temporary investigation room built from 2 glass-walled offices beside the accounting department. 3 monitors covered the desk in front of her. Priya stood behind another examiner, while a technician compared the current vendor database with an archived copy. On one screen, the company ledger showed millions of dollars leaving Halden through newly created vendors. On another, the bank records showed something different. Talia pointed to the gap. "The accounting system says the payments were approved and released. The bank has no matching outbound transfers." I understood enough to see why that mattered. If someone had truly stolen the money, the bank would have recorded where it went. If only the company's ledger had been altered, then the missing millions might never have left Halden at all. The records could have been changed to make the company look guilty. The technician opened a sequence of approval logs. Each entry carried names, timestamps, and permission levels that appeared legitimate until he placed them beside records from the company's retired accounting system. "They copied the old structure," Talia said. "The field order, the approval labels, even the way the employee codes were formatted. These weren't generated naturally by the current platform. Someone inserted them using an older template." Priya looked directly at her. "That is a working theory, not a conclusion. Your findings still require independent reproduction." "I know," Talia said. There was no irritation in her voice. She had chosen the discipline that my parents had spent years avoiding. The door opened, and Nolan entered carrying a folder and a sealed evidence bag. He placed both on Priya's desk. "This is what we should be focusing on," he said. Inside the folder was the email from Elias Ward. Nolan had highlighted one sentence: "I will burn the ghost vendors out of that system, if none of you have the courage to do it." The evidence bag held an inventory sheet for a backup device that had disappeared when Elias was terminated. Nolan also produced a security report showing that Elias's account had appeared in the remote access system shortly before the attack. "He threatened the company, took a backup, and accessed the network," Nolan said. "How much more do you need?" "Context," Talia replied. "Proof that the account activity was actually his. Proof that the missing device contains the altered records. Proof that the email referred to an attack rather than an internal cleanup." Victor entered behind him. "The bank is waiting for a preliminary attribution. If you identify Ward as the attacker, they may reopen the credit line today." Talia turned from the monitors. "If we name him without sufficient evidence, and we are wrong, we contaminate the investigation and give the real attacker time to destroy what remains. You are allowing personal history to slow this down," Victor said. Priya stepped between them before Talia could answer. "The special committee authorized an independent investigation. No one in current management will dictate the conclusion." Victor's eyes moved to me. For a moment, I was 17 again, expected to lower my head because he had entered the room. I did not. A member of the accounting team escorted me through the factory to confirm how vendor records had been handled when I worked there. The building had expanded, but some corridors remained unchanged. The same gray tile ran beneath my feet. The same oily warmth drifted from the production floor. Machines struck metal in steady intervals, each impact traveling through the soles of my shoes. Workers watched us pass. Some recognized my face from the news. Others only knew I was the investigator's mother, and Victor Halden's estranged daughter. Near the assembly line, a broad-shouldered man in a Navy supervisor's shirt stopped beside a safety rail. His hair had turned white, but I recognized Frank Keene. 20 years earlier, he had managed receiving records and signed off on freight deliveries. "Marissa," he said. "Frank." His gaze dropped to the floor. "I heard you were back." I was asked to explain the old process. He nodded too quickly. "That was a long time ago." "You believed the memo?" His jaw tightened. "Everyone did." The shame in his face told me there was more behind the answer, but he looked toward the workers gathering nearby and stepped away before I could ask. He was not ready to say what he remembered. At the entrance to the break room, Rosa Delgado waited beside a vending machine. I recognized the blue jacket from the television interview. Up close, she looked more tired than angry. "You're Talia's mother?" she asked. "Yes." "Can she prove this was a hack before Friday?" Around us, workers pretended not to listen. One man held a lunch container without opening it. A woman checked her phone and then slipped it back into her pocket. "I don't know," I said. Rosa's expression hardened, but I continued before she could turn away. "She will not tell the bank what it wants to hear unless the evidence supports it. I know that is not the promise you need, but it is the only honest one I can give." Rosa studied me, then nodded once. "My son needs his prescription refilled Saturday. Honesty won't pay for it if the insurance stops." "I understand." I did not tell her everything would be fine. My family had used promises that way for years, offering comfort they had no intention of making true. Claudia intercepted me outside the executive offices. She touched my elbow lightly, as if we were walking into a luncheon rather than through the company that had branded me a thief. "Come with me for a moment." She led me into a small conference room and closed the door. "This investigation is becoming unnecessarily personal," she said. "Whatever happened 20 years ago cannot be allowed to destroy 800 families now." "You mean it cannot be allowed to expose you?" Her mouth tightened. "I mean the past is finished. If you help Talia understand the urgency, we can repair things. Your name can be restored. You can be compensated. There are ways to make up for what you lost." She spoke as though my reputation were an asset. The family still owned and could return when convenient. "What exactly do you want me to do?" "Tell her Elias had the access and the motive. Encourage her to issue a preliminary finding so the bank releases payroll. The rest can be examined later." "You want my daughter to sign a conclusion before she has proof?" "I want her to save people." There it was again. Not an apology, not the truth, but 800 workers placed between us like a shield. "You threw me out to protect this company," I said. "Now you're asking me to help you use the same company to pressure my daughter." Claudia lowered her voice. "This is not about us. It has always been about you." I left before she could turn the conversation into another offer. When I returned to the investigation room, Talia had opened the oldest surviving Crestline record. Priya and the independent examiner stood beside her. "We found the first approval timestamp," Talia said. The transaction had been authorized at 6:14 a.m. on the day she was born. Victor, who had followed me into the room, dismissed it immediately. The old system was unreliable. Server clocks drifted. Archived timestamps were sometimes imported incorrectly. "That is possible," Talia said, "which is why the timestamp alone proves nothing." Then she looked at me. "I need the hospital admission record, the delivery record, or documentation showing when your access was disabled. Preferably all three." The room seemed to contract around us. She was asking the right question. That did not make it hurt less. "You know I was there," I said. "I know because you're my mother. The bank, the insurer, and the board need evidence that can be verified without knowing you." Love could make her believe me. Love could not correct a corporate record, reopen a credit line, or protect 800 paychecks. The suitcase was still beneath my bed. Inside it, the papers I had refused to face were waiting to be tested against the lie. The record said I had approved the payment while I was giving birth, and unless I opened the suitcase, the lie would remain stronger than my memory. I waited until we were back in my apartment before I pulled the suitcase from beneath the bed. Talia set her laptop bag on the kitchen table and opened a blank interview form. The sight of it tightened something in my chest. She had not come home only as my daughter. She had come because every answer I gave might become part of an investigation. "Before we open anything," she said, "I need to understand your access." I remained standing beside the suitcase. "You already know my account was disabled. I know you remember it being disabled. I need the process. Who could reset your password? Did anyone else know it? Did you ever leave it written near your desk?" "No." "Who had administrator access?" "The technology department. My supervisor probably could have requested changes. Your grandfather could order anything done." "What did you print before you left?" "A vendor list." "Only that?" "My last pay stub. The account notice. Maybe a few pages from my school schedule." "Did you give your password to Nolan?" The question struck harder than it should have. "No." "Did he ever watch you enter it?" "I don't know. He came through the office sometimes." "Did you use the same password anywhere else?" I turned away. "Are you asking whether I made it easy for them?" "I'm asking how someone used your identity." "You sound as though I'm a suspect." Talia closed the interview form, but did not shut the laptop. "I believe you. Then why are you questioning me like this?" "Because the report cannot say my mother told me she was innocent. It has to show why the records are wrong." I gripped the suitcase handle until the cracked vinyl pressed into my palm. "Records were used to destroy my life. Forgive me if I don't share your faith in them." "I don't have faith in records. I test them." Her voice remained controlled, which only made my anger feel louder. "You think everything can be repaired if you find the right timestamp?" "No. I think timestamps can expose someone who counted on you staying silent." I stared at her. She had never spoken to me that way. Talia stood and moved away from the table. "You told me they rejected us because you were pregnant. You never told me they accused you of stealing. You never told me my name was born inside a criminal investigation. I was protecting you." "From what? Knowing who they were? Or knowing who you were?" The question left no safe answer. I sat on the edge of the sofa. "I was afraid that if you knew everything, you would spend your life trying to make them admit they were wrong. I thought one day you might want their name, their money, or a place at that table. You thought I would choose them. I thought every child eventually wonders whether the family that rejected her might change." Talia's face softened, but the hurt remained. "You did not give me the choice to wonder with the truth." For years, I had told myself silence was a wall around her. I had never considered that from her side, it might look like a locked door. I placed the suitcase on the coffee table. The metal zipper pull resisted when I tugged it. I tried again, harder. The teeth separated with a dry, tearing sound, then caught near the corner where the lining had ripped 20 years earlier. A stale smell rose from inside, part dust, part old paper, with the faint chemical trace of printer ink. Clothes no longer filled it. I had removed those years ago. Only a thin stack of documents remained beneath the loose fabric. My fingers found the two halves of the employee badge first. My 17-year-old face smiled from one broken piece. The cut passed through the Halden logo and stopped just below my photograph. Talia did not touch it. I lifted the torn lining and removed the folded VATR list. The paper had yellowed along the creases. Crestline Logistics was still circled in red, along with the missing delivery records and repeated invoice amounts. Beneath it lay my last pay stub and the notice from Information Technology. The date showed my account had been disabled 3 days before Talia was born. The employee code printed near the top was MLang 17. My hands began to shake. The final envelope contained the hospital receipt I had forgotten saving. It listed the time I was admitted, the date of delivery, and the ward where I had remained when the system claimed I approved the Crestline payment. Talia read each page without celebrating. She photographed nothing until she called Priya and explained what we had found. Priya instructed us not to separate, mark, or clean the documents. An evidence courier arrived 40 minutes later with protective sleeves and a receipt for every item removed. Watching strangers carry the suitcase papers away felt like losing them a second time. Talia sat beside me after the door closed. This can prove you could not have logged in legally. Legally is not the same as actually. No. That is why they have to verify it. The independent review took place that night in a secured conference room at Priya's office. A document examiner inspected the paper, printing patterns, staples, folds, and ink. A second technician compared the employee code and deactivation notice with archived system documentation. No one declared the papers genuine because they looked old. No one accepted my memory because I sounded convincing. Shortly after midnight, Priya returned with the preliminary findings. The materials are consistent with documents created 20 years ago, she said. The account identifier on the deactivation notice matches Mlang 17. According to the system policy in effect at the time, Marissa could not have authenticated after that deactivation without an administrator restoring access or someone falsifying the log. My lungs released a breath I had been holding for 2 decades. The records did not prove who had used my name. They proved I had not used it myself. My phone rang before we left Priya's office. Frank Keene's name appeared on the screen. "I should have said something this morning," he began. "I saw the technology manager cut off your access." Victor stood there while it was done. "Why didn't you say that 20 years ago?" Frank was silent long enough for me to hear machinery in the background. He was still at the plant. "Victor called the supervisors together after the memo went out. He said you had admitted everything, and that anyone spreading doubt would be treated as interfering with an internal investigation. I had 2 children and a mortgage. So you let them call me a thief." "Yes." The word came without an excuse, and that made it harder to dismiss. "I am not ready to forgive you," I said. "I understand. But you will give Priya a sworn statement." "I will." I ended the call without thanking him. His testimony mattered. That did not erase the years his silence had helped create. Across the room, Talia had returned to the digital records. She arranged the current vendor template beside a technical manual for Halden's retired accounting platform. "Look at this," she said. The modern system listed vendor name, tax identification, address, banking details, approval status, and creator code. The fraudulent entries followed a different sequence: vendor name, mailing code, creator code, freight class, approval tier, then banking information. "That is the order from the old platform," she explained. "The company stopped using it years ago. A person guessing your code would not know to preserve this field structure. So they copied more than my name. They copied a specific archived record." The room suddenly felt colder. Whoever had built the current fraud had not stumbled across an old employee number. They had found the original file, studied the lie that ruined me, and rebuilt it inside a new system. Whoever built the new fraud had not invented the lie about me. They had found the original and copied it. By sunrise, Elias Ward's face was on every local news broadcast. Halden Security had given police his photograph, his last known address, and the registration number of his car. Reporters repeated the same 3 facts Nolan had placed before us. Elias had threatened to burn the ghost vendors out of the system, copied company data before he was fired, and disappeared after the attack. Nolan wanted Priya to authorize a public statement naming him as the primary suspect. "The longer we hesitate, the more frightened the bank becomes," he said during the morning call. "We have evidence, motive, and an employee who fled." Talia sat beside the independent examiner in Priya's conference room. "We have an email fragment, account activity that may have been spoofed, and a missing backup device. None of that proves he altered the ledger." He ran technology for 12 years. That proves access, not authorship. Nolan's voice sharpened through the speaker. 800 people do not have the luxury of your academic caution. Talia did not raise her voice. Naming the wrong person would protect whoever actually did this. Priya ended the argument by refusing to approve the statement. Nolan disconnected without saying goodbye. I was still looking at the dark phone screen when my own phone vibrated. The message came from an unknown number. Crestline was not the first. Check Harbor Ridge Tooling. Do not answer, Nolan. If you want the untouched records, come alone. I read it twice. Harbor Ridge Tooling had appeared on the printed vendor list in my suitcase, but not in any discussion since the investigation began. Only someone who had seen the old files could have known it mattered. I showed the message to Priya instead of following the instruction. You are not going anywhere alone, she said. She replied through a secure number and arranged a meeting at an off-site document storage facility used by her firm. 2 private security officers checked the building before we entered. Talia and the independent examiner waited in a separate room, so Elias could not later claim that she had influenced what he provided. He arrived 20 minutes late through a loading entrance. I barely recognized him from his company photograph. His shirt was wrinkled, gray stubble covered his jaw, and his eyes moved toward every sound in the corridor. He carried a small hard case against his chest with both hands. Priya asked him to place it on the table. This is the backup Nolan says you stole? She asked. Yes. Did you attack Halden's systems? No. Elias swallowed before continuing. I took a copy because I knew they were going to erase it. Priya reminded him that everything he said could be turned over to law enforcement. Elias nodded as though he had already rehearsed that consequence. The email said you would burn the ghost vendors out of the system, I said. His face twisted with frustration. Read the full thread. I told Nolan the vendor database contained dormant entities with no tax verification, no receiving history, and no legitimate business purpose. I said we needed to burn them out through an audited cleanup before they were reused. He opened a folder and slid forward a printed email chain. Nolan had forwarded only one sentence to security and the board. The lines above it showed Elias requesting an independent review of archived vendor records. 6 months earlier, he explained, an automated storage alert had shown Nolan accessing a restricted archive from the company's retired accounting platform. The archive contained old vendor templates, employee codes, internal investigations, and system snapshots dating back more than 20 years. Nolan said he was preparing for a software migration, Elias told us. But there was no approved migration. When I checked the audit trail, he had opened the Crestline file repeatedly. What did you do? Priya asked. I asked him why. He told me to delete the archive because it was creating retention risk. I refused without a legal review. 3 days later, he terminated me for violating access policy. Before surrendering his credentials, Elias had created a read-only snapshot of the archive and stored it on an encrypted offline device. He claimed he intended to give it to outside counsel, but after Nolan publicly accused him of stealing data, he panicked. He moved between motels and stopped using his regular phone. Running made you look guilty, I said. I know. His hands tightened around the edge of the table. I also knew the people controlling company security were reporting to the man I had challenged. Priya documented the device, sealed the original, and allowed forensic staff to work from a verified copy. Talia entered only after the chain of custody had been recorded. For the next 3 hours, the room filled with the low sound of keyboards and cooling fans. I watched from behind the glass, while Talia and the independent examiner compared Elias's snapshot with the current accounting environment. The first difference appeared in the vendor table. The companies linked to the supposed missing millions did not exist in the snapshot taken before Elias was fired. They had been inserted later using field structures copied from the retired system. The second difference appeared in the approval logs. Entire sequences had been duplicated, then relabeled with current executive names and recent dates. The pattern looked like a history of authorized payments, but it was assembled from old records. The third difference came from the bank reconciliation files. The ledger claimed money had left Halden. The operating accounts showed no corresponding transfers. Talia called Priya and the bank's fraud counsel into the room. "The present transactions are fabricated," she said. "The attacker altered the internal records to create evidence of theft. The cash did not leave the operating accounts through these entries." The independent examiner confirmed that he had reproduced her findings. For the first time since the crisis began, Priya allowed herself to exhale. She contacted the bank with a limited preliminary report. It was not enough to restore the entire credit line, but it was strong enough for the bank to consider an emergency payroll facility if the board removed anyone connected to the intrusion from financial control. 800 paychecks were not safe yet, but they were no longer dependent on proving that Elias was a criminal. I should have felt relief. Then Talia opened the Crestline archive. The payments from 20 years earlier were different from the fabricated entries on the current system. They had matching bank transfers. Money had actually left Halden's accounts and reached Crestline Logistics. Crestline had been real enough to receive money, even if it had never delivered anything. The snapshot contained several versions of an internal investigation note. In the earliest version, my name appeared beside the sentence. Employee identified vendor inconsistencies and requested receiving documentation. In the next version, the language changed. It said I had created the vendor without authorization. The final version stated that I had admitted wrongdoing, resigned, and left Riverton before investigators could question me further. Each revision carried a different author record. The public memo accusing me of running away had been drafted from Claudia Halden's executive communications account. The file closing the internal investigation had been approved with Victor Halden's electronic authorization. My mother had written the story everyone believed. My father had made it official. Talia looked through the glass at me. There was no doubt in her face now. Only the pain of seeing how carefully the lie had been constructed. The hack was fake. The old theft was not. And the document that buried me carried both my parents' signatures. Priya summoned Victor and Claudia, Laudia, to the old executive conference room. The room had once been used for family dinners after company events. When my father liked to, Priya told me I was not required to attend. I went anyway. For 20 years, my parents had discussed my guilt in rooms where I had no voice. I would not let them explain my life without me again. Talia sat beside the independent examiner with only 3 pages in front of her. She did not bury the truth beneath technical language. She showed the original note, identifying me as the employee who questioned Crestline, the later version accusing me of creating it, and the account deactivation record proving my access had been removed before the first payment carried my code. Then she placed the hospital record beside the 614 timestamp. "The current attack copied this archived structure," she said. "The transactions in the present ledger were fabricated. The Crestline payments from 20 years ago were not. Those funds actually left the company." Victor did not look at me. "Archive systems are incomplete. Draft notes are not final findings. The drafts show who changed the findings," Priya said. My father's denial lasted less than a minute. When he understood that the document history had survived, his posture changed. He stopped arguing about whether it happened and began arguing that it had been necessary. Halden was weeks from violating its lending covenants, he said. A failed expansion had drained cash reserves. If the bank had learned the full position, it would have called the loans. Hundreds of people would have lost their jobs. "So you created Crestline," I said. "It was a temporary transfer mechanism. The funds were going to be restored once the new contracts paid. They were never restored. The contracts collapsed. Circumstances changed." He spoke as though stolen money had been weather, something that had happened around him rather than because of him. I looked at the final internal report. "Why did you use my name?" For the first time, Victor met my eyes. "You were leaving. You threw me out. You were pregnant, emotional, and already determined to abandon the future we planned for you. No one would have believed you understood the accounting system well enough to uncover a complex financing problem. No, I said. They believed I understood it well enough to steal from it. His jaw tightened. You had already damaged your credibility. The words settled over the table with more force than any confession. He had not selected me because I had access. He had selected me because he believed shame had made me disposable. I turned to Claudia. And the memo? Her hands remained folded in her lap. Your father needed time to stabilize the company. That is not what I asked. She looked toward Priya, then Talia, as though searching for a version of the truth that would injure her least. I told the family you were ashamed and did not want contact. I told employees you had left Riverton after admitting what you had done. People were already talking about the pregnancy. They accepted the explanation. You made sure they did. I was trying to contain a scandal. The room blurred for a moment, not because I was surprised, but because every disconnected piece finally locked into place. The locked accounts, the resignation papers, the speed of the company memo, and the way Claudia had warned me not to return until I understood what I had done to the family had never been separate punishments. They needed a public disgrace large enough to make every other accusation believable. Talia was never your shame, I said. She was the excuse you used to make everyone ashamed of me. Claudia's face crumpled. She reached across the table, but I moved my hand before she could touch it. I am sorry, she whispered. I was frightened, and we were protecting the company. That is not an apology. That is the same decision with softer words. We thought we could fix it later. You had 20 years. She lowered her hand. Priya allowed the silence to remain before speaking. There is another problem. If we disclose the historic fraud without a controlled legal and financial plan, the bank may still terminate support. The insurer may also deny portions of the claim because former and current executives concealed material misconduct. The timer on Talia's laptop showed fewer than 30 hours before payroll. Victor seized on Priya's warning. Then we proceed carefully. Talia confirms the current records were created by an outside attacker. The old matter remains confidential while counsel resolves it. Marissa receives a formal correction. Compensation, whatever amount is appropriate, the company survives. He said compensation as though 20 years could be entered into a spreadsheet and balanced. You want Talia to call it an outside attack before she knows who did it, I said. We know Ward had the access. Elias has already been cleared of altering the ledger. Victor's eyes flickered. Then someone else. The point is that the current theft did not occur. The current theft did not occur, Talia said. The intrusion did. Victor leaned toward her. Then say that. Release the finding, and leave the old records to the attorneys. The choice was exactly cruel enough to sound responsible. If I stayed silent, the bank might release payroll, and Rosa could refill her son's prescription. If I refused, the company's history could become the reason 800 families lost their income. For 2 decades, I had wanted proof strong enough to clear my name. Now that proof sat on the table, and using it carelessly could turn my vindication into someone else's punishment. Talia looked at Priya, rather than at Victor. We may not have to choose between concealment and collapse. If we can prove the misconduct belongs to specific individuals and remove them from control, the bank can evaluate the operating company separately from the people who compromised it. Priya nodded cautiously. That would require evidence identifying who benefited from the current attack and a governance plan the bank trusts. The conference room door opened. Elias entered with the independent examiner and placed a new access report on the table. I finished reviewing the archive logs, he said. Someone opened the Crestline files repeatedly during the 6 months before the attack. The access was not mine. Talia scanned the entries. The credentials belonged to Nolan's executive account. Some sessions had occurred after midnight. Others had been routed through a vendor support portal he controlled. Priya's phone rang before anyone could speak. She listened, wrote down a name, and asked the caller to send the corporate filings immediately. When she ended the call, she turned her laptop toward us. Northbridge Renewal Partners was incorporated 3 months before the attack. It has already retained advisors specializing in distressed manufacturing acquisitions. Victor frowned. I have never heard of it. The ownership is layered through 2 holding companies, Priya said, but the person authorized to communicate with its investment advisor is connected to Nolan. Not proof that my brother had built the attack. Not yet. But it was proof that he had studied the buried fraud while a secret buyer prepared to profit from Halden's collapse. My parents had used me to save their company once. Now my brother was preparing to destroy it so he could own what remained. Priya's team spent the next 4 hours tracing Northbridge Renewal Partners through documents no one could dismiss as speculation. They did not break into private accounts or search Nolan's devices without authority. They followed public incorporation records, contracts obtained through the board's investigation, emails preserved from Halden's servers, and access logs Elias had saved before his dismissal. Each document revealed another piece of a company that appeared to have been waiting for Halden Industrial Components to fail. Northbridge had hired advisors who specialized in buying distressed manufacturers. It had commissioned valuations of our factory, production equipment, patents, and customer contracts. One report estimated how much those assets could be sold for separately. Another calculated the savings Northbridge would receive if it acquired the business without assuming its pension obligations. The workers appeared only as liabilities. A staffing proposal recommended retaining fewer than 300 employees after the purchase. The remaining jobs could be outsourced, automated, or eliminated once the most profitable contracts had been transferred. Rosa's rent, her son's medication, and hundreds of other lives had been reduced to a column labeled Labor Reduction Opportunity. Talia stood beside the independent examiner as he projected the documents onto a screen. Northbridge was preparing to acquire Halden's assets before the attack occurred. Its advisors knew which contracts, patents, and machines would retain value after bankruptcy. Priya opened an email recovered under the board's legal authority. The sender was a consultant working for Northbridge. The message referred to the executive sponsor and warned that the acquisition would succeed only if Halden's bank withdrew operating support before another buyer could intervene. The recipient's address belonged to a technology vendor used by Nolan's office. Elias examined the access records from that vendor portal. This account was granted temporary administrator privileges 3 weeks before the ledger was altered. Who approved the privileges? Priya asked. Elias enlarged the authorization record. Nolan Halden. The account had accessed the vendor database, copied archived Crestline templates, and inserted approval records into the current accounting platform. It had also created the remote session later attributed to Elias. Nolan had not needed Elias's password. He had used the vendor portal to make the activity appear connected to Elias's account. Talia arranged the timeline across the screen. Nolan opened the Crestline archive 6 months earlier. Elias questioned him and was fired. Northbridge was incorporated 3 months later. Its advisors valued Halden's assets. The vendor account received administrator access. The false transactions were inserted. The bank froze the credit line. Every step moved the company closer to the sale Northbridge had already planned. The conference room door opened before Priya could finish documenting the sequence. Nolan entered with Victor behind him and 2 members of corporate security near the hallway. He looked at the screen, then at the files spread across the table. You have no authority to investigate a contingency buyer, he said. Priya remained seated. The special committee authorized us to investigate any party that benefited from the attack. Northbridge is not a conspiracy. It is an emergency option. I explored ways to preserve valuable assets in case the company became insolvent. By eliminating 500 jobs and abandoning the pension plan? I asked. His eyes moved to me. By saving what could still be saved. The answer sounded so much like Victor that I almost looked toward my father to see whether he recognized it. Nolan turned to Talia. You found what you wanted to find. You came into this building believing your mother had been wronged, and now every document becomes proof against our family." Talia did not defend me or herself. She pointed to the first timestamp on the screen. "Your executive account accessed the Crestline archive on January 12th. Elias questioned the access on January 15th. He was dismissed on January 18th. Northbridge was incorporated on February 3rd. Its advisors requested valuations of Halden's unencumbered assets on February 9th. The technology vendor account you approved received temporary administrator rights on April 7th. The fraudulent ledger entries were created through that portal 11 days later." Nolan folded his arms. "A timeline is not proof I performed the attack." "No," Talia said. "It establishes opportunity, preparation, and financial benefit. The access data establishes the method." Priya looked toward the independent examiner. "We still need the original authentication log from the vendor gateway. The current copy shows the session, but not the device certificate that initiated it. That log can connect the administrator activity to a specific authorized machine." Elias said the gateway retained certificate data in a protected diagnostic partition. Retrieving it would require freezing the system before routine maintenance overwrote the oldest records. Nolan's expression changed so slightly that I might have missed it if I had not spent my childhood watching him measure our father's moods. He removed his phone and called the technology operations manager. "We are rebuilding the accounting environment tonight," he said. "Take all affected systems offline, wipe the compromised instances, and restore from the last approved backup." Elias stepped forward. "A rebuild will overwrite the diagnostic partition. That is the point of rebuilding a compromised system." Talia was already turning toward Priya. "Issue a preservation hold now. The gateway, vendor portal, identity server, and all related backups." Priya typed the order and sent it to Corporate Security, Technology Operations, the board's special committee, and outside counsel. "No system covered by this notice may be altered, erased, restored, or removed," she said. "Any attempt to proceed could constitute destruction of evidence." Nolan looked toward the security officers. "I am still the chief executive of this company. Carry out the rebuild." Neither man moved. He called Frank Keene and ordered him to clear personnel from the server area so the technology team could begin. Frank arrived with 2 plant managers, still wearing his safety vest. Priya showed him the preservation notice. "If we let the system be wiped, are we violating a legal order?" Frank asked. "Yes," Priya said. Nolan stepped closer. "Your job is to operate this plant, not interpret legal documents." Frank looked at him, then toward the factory floor beyond the glass. 20 years ago, I kept quiet because I was afraid of losing my job. I am not helping erase another record." The other managers stood beside him. No one shouted. No one threatened Nolan. They simply refused to open the secured server corridor. It was the first time I had seen employees inside Halden choose evidence over obedience. Nolan stared at them before walking out of the room. Victor followed without speaking. Claudia remained near the far wall, her face drained of color. Half an hour later, while Talia and the examiners prepared to preserve the gateway log, my phone rang. Nolan asked me to meet him alone, in an empty office near the executive suite. I told Priya where I was going, and left the door open when I entered. Nolan stood beside the window, looking down at the lights of the factory. "You can still stop this," he said. "I did not start it. The bank needs confidence. If your documents disappear as credible evidence, the historic issue becomes unproven. I can convince the board to approve the restructuring loan and fund payroll. You want the suitcase. I want you to state that the papers were stored improperly, that you cannot verify where they came from, and that your memories of that period are unreliable. You want me to call myself a liar. I want you to protect 800 people." He turned toward me. "If you refuse, the bank may walk away tomorrow. Payroll will fail. The factory will close, and every worker outside those gates will hear that Marissa Lang chose revenge over their jobs." My father had once placed resignation papers in front of a pregnant girl and called them the price of protecting the company. Nolan was placing the same bargain before me with more lives attached. "Give me the suitcase," he said. "Let the old story remain uncertain, and I can save them." I did not answer. Through the office window, I could see workers gathered near the entrance, waiting for news. Rosa stood near the front in her blue factory jacket, checking her phone while the night shift lights burned behind her. 20 years ago, they had asked me to sacrifice my name. Now Nolan was asking me to sacrifice the truth, and this time 800 paychecks were tied to my answer. I left Nolan standing beside the window and returned to Priya's conference room with the suitcase still locked in the evidence cabinet. "I am not giving him the documents," I said. "And I am not signing anything that calls my own memory unreliable." Priya closed the folder in front of her. Talia watched me from across the table, waiting for the rest. "I do not want to destroy this company to punish my family," I continued. "But those workers cannot keep being used as a shield every time a Halden is afraid of the truth." Priya nodded once. "Then we separate the operating company from the people who compromised it." The board's special committee convened an emergency meeting before dawn. Priya presented a resolution that would suspend Victor, Claudia, and Nolan from all management authority, freeze the voting rights attached to their shares under the company's crisis provisions, and appoint an independent restructuring administrator. The bank would consider a restricted credit facility that could be used only for payroll and essential operations. The cyber insurer would continue evaluating recovery costs because the current intrusion was real, even though the supposed theft recorded in the ledger was not. None of it erased the historic fraud. None of it protected the people responsible. It offered the factory a chance to survive without them. The meeting moved to the main boardroom, where representatives from the bank and insurer joined by secure video. The payroll screen remained open on a side monitor. Hundreds of transfers were prepared, but could not be released without funding. Talia sat with the independent examiner. Priya had made certain my daughter was not the sole voice behind any conclusion. The examiner began with the present attack. The claimed transfers, totaling $6.8 million, did not leave Halden's operating accounts. The internal ledger, vendor records, and approval history were altered to create the appearance of executive theft. Talia explained how the false entries had been inserted through the technology vendor portal and built from an archived Crestline template. She showed the authorization Nolan had granted, the timing of his archive access, and the attempted system rebuild that would have overwritten the remaining gateway evidence. The examiner then displayed the recovered device certificate. It matched a company laptop assigned to Nolan's executive office. Nolan leaned back as though distance from the table could separate him from the record. "That machine was used by staff. Your office access log shows the laptop connected from your private suite," Priya said. "Your security badge opened the suite 4 minutes earlier. No other badge entered until the session ended." Talia moved to the Northbridge documents. The secret fund had valued Halden's patents, machinery, and contracts before the attack. Its staffing plan eliminated more than 500 positions and excluded the pension obligation from the proposed acquisition. "You created a buyer before you created the crisis," Priya said. Nolan's face remained controlled, but he offered no explanation that fit the sequence. The historic records came next. Crestline had received real money 20 years earlier. My account had already been disabled when my code was used. My hospital records placed me in labor when the first approval was entered. The original investigation note identified me as the employee who questioned the vendor. Victor's authorization and Claudia's memo transformed me from witness into thief. The independent examiner confirmed every document had been reproduced and verified. Victor pushed himself to his feet. "You remove this family, and the company dies. Halden exists because I built it. The bank knows that. The customers know that." Frank Keene stood near the end of the table with 2 plant managers. He had been invited to explain whether operations could continue under an outside administrator. "With respect, Victor, you have not run a production line in years," Frank said. "The supervisors know the schedules. The engineers know the equipment. The purchasing team knows the suppliers. The workers can operate this plant without the Halden family. Victor stared at him, as if an old piece of machinery had spoken out of turn. A knock sounded at the door. Rosa Delgado stepped inside with a representative from the employee committee. She did not look at my parents or ask who would be arrested. "Is payroll going through?" she asked. Priya answered honestly. "The bank has agreed to review the emergency facility if the board passes the governance resolution and the independent administrator signs an asset preservation agreement." "How long?" "Minutes, if the vote passes." Rosa nodded. "Then please vote." She left as quickly as she had entered. There was no applause, no speech about justice. Her son still needed medication, and Friday had almost arrived. The special committee approved the resolution. Victor, Claudia, and Nolan were removed from authority pending the investigations. Their voting shares were suspended. The board appointed Elaine Mercer, a restructuring administrator with no connection to the Halden family, to control company funds and operations. Elaine signed the bank's certification, stating that no assets would be sold, transferred, pledged, or moved without independent approval. The bank representative uploaded the agreement for final review. The payroll screen still read pending. Nolan turned toward Talia. "This was always your plan, wasn't it? Disgrace us, take control, and claim the company your mother thinks she was denied." Talia looked at the board members before answering. "I refuse any position, ownership interest, consulting payment, inheritance, or other benefit connected to Halden Industrial Components. Put that in the minutes." Priya did. Talia then looked directly at Nolan. "I do not want what you tried to steal." Priya placed the Northbridge acquisition plan beside the Gateway report. "Your fund was prepared to buy the assets after the bank withdrew support. Your authorized portal created the false records that caused the withdrawal. You attempted to erase the device certificate after learning we were preserving it." Nolan opened his mouth, but no answer came. Claudia had remained silent through most of the meeting. Now she turned toward Talia with tears in her eyes. "You saved the company," she said. "You saved this family." Talia's expression did not change. "I protected the workers. I protected their paychecks, their pensions, and the lives you kept using as shields. I didn't protect you." She placed the report on the table between them. Priya informed the board that the evidence concerning the historic Crestline fraud, the false internal investigation, the current intrusion, and Northbridge would be transferred to the appropriate state and federal authorities. The special committee's actions preserved the company, not anyone's immunity. My father lowered himself into his chair. My mother stared at the report. Nolan looked toward the door, where corporate security now stood. On the side monitor, the bank status remained unchanged. 5 minutes passed, then 3. No one spoke. The room was quiet enough for me to hear the factory machinery below us and the soft hum of the conference screen. I thought of Rosa watching her phone, of hundreds of workers waiting in cars, break rooms, and kitchens. The bank representative finally returned to the video call. "The restricted payroll facility is approved," she said. "Funds are being released to the administrator, controlled account." Elaine entered her authorization. The payroll manager pressed submit. For a moment, all 800 transfers remained gray. Then the first line changed to green. Another followed, then a dozen, then entire pages. Phones began vibrating beyond the boardroom as workers received deposit notifications. I did not smile at Victor or watch Claudia cry. I did not need them to understand what they had lost. Priya unlocked the evidence cabinet and returned the empty suitcase to me. The documents would remain preserved, but the cracked brown case was mine. 800 payments turned green on the screen. Behind us, the investigators entered the room. 1 year after the night the payroll screen turned green, I drove past Halden Industrial Components during the second shift. The factory no longer carried my family's name above the main entrance, The silver letters had been removed while the company completed its restructuring, leaving a lighter outline on the brick where they had been mounted for decades. The machines inside still carried the Halden mark, but the building itself now belonged to the operating company and its creditors, not to Victor's sense of legacy. Hundreds of windows glowed against the dark. The plant had not recovered by magic. 2 smaller product lines had been suspended, several executives had been replaced, and every major expense required review by the independent board. Customers had demanded new audits before renewing contracts. Some employees had left because they no longer trusted the company's future. But the factory had not closed. Most of the 800 jobs remained. The new board included 2 representatives elected by the workers, and the pension fund had been placed under outside supervision with a formal recovery schedule. The plan would take years, but the money could no longer be moved, simply because one executive decided the company mattered more than the people who worked there. I pulled into the visitor lot because Frank Keene had asked me to stop by before his retirement dinner. I found him on the factory floor beside a younger supervisor named Lena Ortiz, explaining a production schedule with the same seriousness he once used to avoid looking me in the eye. "I am staying 3 more months," he told me. "Long enough to train her properly." Lena smiled. He has said that twice already. Frank had not asked me to forgive him again. He had given sworn testimony, helped investigators reconstruct the old receiving process, and spent the year answering questions that forced him to admit where fear had made him obedient. That did not return the years I lost, but it was more honest than another apology. Rosa Delgado walked over during her break, still wearing the blue jacket with her name above the pocket. Her son had remained in the same school. Their apartment lease had been renewed, and his medication was still covered through the company insurance plan. "We complain about the new paperwork every day," she said. "That is how I know the place is still alive." I laughed because she did. Rosa did not thank me for saving her life. I was glad. She had never needed a family drama turned into a heroic story. She had needed her paycheck, her insurance, and the chance to make plans beyond Friday. Talia did not work at the plant. The board offered her a senior security role after the investigation, and one director suggested that the company needed a Halden descendant in leadership to restore public trust. She declined before they finished explaining the salary. She remained with Meridian Cyber Assurance, where she investigated breaches for companies that had no connection to our family. Her promotion came 6 months later, after another team reviewed her work from the Halden case and found that every major conclusion had been independently reproduced. She was respected because she disclosed her conflict, preserved the evidence, and allowed her own findings to be challenged. Not because she was Victor Halden's granddaughter. My name had also been corrected. The company issued a public statement, acknowledging that I had been the first employee to identify irregularities involving Crestline Logistics. My old personnel file was amended to show that my access had been disabled before the fraudulent approvals and that the accusation against me had been false. The statement used careful legal language. It did not say what it felt like to leave home in the rain with one suitcase. It did not describe how long a lie could live inside a woman after everyone else stopped repeating it. Still, when the revised record arrived at my office, I placed it in the top drawer beside my business license. I did not frame it. I did not need strangers to see that I had been cleared. I needed the truth to exist somewhere official without my parents controlling the words. Victor and Nolan no longer controlled the company. Their shares remained frozen while civil cases and criminal proceedings moved forward. The lawyers sent updates full of dates, motions, and allegations. I read only what I needed to know. Victor continued to insist that everything he had done was meant to preserve Halden. Nolan claimed Northbridge had been a legitimate rescue plan. Their explanations no longer decided what happened next. Claudia cooperated with investigators after the board removed her access to company records. Several months later, a letter arrived at my office in her handwriting. I left it unopened for 3 days. When I finally read it, she did not say she was sorry, but frightened. She did not say she lied, but believed it was necessary. She wrote that she had chosen the company's reputation over her daughter, then kept choosing the lie because admitting it would expose who she had become. The letter did not contain the word but. I placed it in a drawer and did not answer. Talia asked whether I intended to reply one day. I told her I did not know. Silence was no longer a hiding place for me, but it could still be a boundary. Claudia was allowed to apologize. She was not entitled to immediate access to the life she had rejected. Neither Talia nor I changed our last name. We did not accept the old family house when lawyers suggested it might become available through a settlement. I did not want a bedroom returned to me, after spending 20 years building homes of my own. Talia did not want a title at a company merely because her blood had once been used against her. The brown suitcase returned from evidence storage after the important documents had been cataloged and secured. Its zipper no longer closed properly, and the torn lining hung loose where I had hidden the papers. I took it to a small repair shop near my office. The owner replaced the zipper, stitched the lining, and cleaned the cracked vinyl without erasing every mark. When he handed it back, it looked cared for rather than new. That mattered to me. I did not want the past restored to some perfect condition. I wanted it strong enough to carry something different. A week later, Talia and I packed for a 4-day trip to the coast. It was the first time we had left Riverton together without moving, working, attending a hearing, or following an emergency. She watched me fold a sweater into the suitcase. "Does it feel strange using that?" she asked. I ran my fingers over the repaired seam. "It used to hold everything they let me take." Talia placed a book beside my sweater. "And what does it hold now?" "Now it holds what I choose to carry." We loaded the suitcase into the trunk and drove out of Riverton before sunrise. The factory lights were visible from the highway, hundreds of small squares burning through the darkness. They no longer looked like my father's empire. They looked like night shift workers finishing orders, supervisors, checking schedules, and families who would wake with health insurance and rent money, because the consequences had finally been placed where they belonged. We were not fleeing the city. We had a reservation, a return date, and keys to homes we had built for ourselves. Years earlier, Victor had told me that my baby would never carry the Halden name. At 17, I had heard it as a sentence passed over my daughter before she was born. Now I understood it as one of the few promises he had kept. They once said my daughter would never carry their name. They were right. Talia carried the truth instead, and when it became heavy enough to crush 800 innocent people, she found a way to set it down only on those who deserved its weight.